Welcome guys. Ending in the media world plays a very key role in the overall quality of the work. Perhaps a good story, a fascinating film, or an extraordinary game cannot show its greatness because of its poor ending. In the game world, too, sometimes the biggest games end in a very weak and hopeless way. In this video we will take a look at some of the weakest and most disappointing endings in the history of video games. Note that poor endings and endings do not in any way imply the overall weakness of that effect. In the following list, many of the works you will see are among the most prominent works of the generation and even history. In fact, it is only this endgame that has been weak and disappointing. There are many poor and hopeless endings in the game world, only some of which are mentioned in the video. Your loved ones also share your opinion with us. Halo 2. The use of cliffhangers is very natural in the world of literature, film and series. Especially in big and popular series, we often see that the last sequence of the last episode of a series ends at a very sensitive and exciting moment. Like the battle of the antagonist and protagonist of the story. But in order to see and understand the continuation of the story, the audience will have to wait until the next chapter and count. But the game world is completely different from the world of movies and series. Each video game is a separate, independent work from its previous and subsequent franchise works. Even sub-versions and spin-offs always have their own independent identities and tell a full story from 0 to 100. The use of cliffhanger is not logical and accepted in the game world like we see in the world of movies and series. Episodic games are a game because the audience expects a complete effect. Suppose, for example, in the title God of War, after 30 hours of adventure, that in the next version you are going to fight Baldur and you have to wait a few years. The Halo 2 title ended with a big question mark and a massive cliffhanger. After hours of Master Chief's efforts and battles with alien forces to save Earth, instead of a logical outcome, the game ends when Master Chief says he wants to end the war and his spaceship reaches Earth. But there is no final battle, and audiences will have to wait until the next version of Halo and buy another console. Metal Gear Solid 5. The Phantom Pain. The endgame of Metal Gear Solid 5 not only had a lot of problems, but also a lot of controversy. It seems that Konami's extensive involvement in the process of making and finishing episodes and eliminating one of the most important end-of-game cutoffs were one of the most important reasons that led to the bizarre end of the game. But cutscene has been eliminated and put aside Kojima's problems with Konami. The other problem is the endgame of its structurally weakness. The endgame is narrated in such a way that thousands of unanswered questions are created in the mind of the audience and there are no answers for them. On the other hand, the beginning and end of the story of the game suffers from strange fictional holes that violate each other. With a simple search and a little research you will find out what I mentioned. Borderlands. After hours of constant effort and shooting to get to Vault and find out the secret to what's inside, gamers will eventually have to beat the giant monster at the end of the game, and so naturally you'd expect to continue to discover Vault's secret. But there's no word on that. After killing the last base, Guardian will thank you and Vault will close again for 200 years. That is, the whole objective game doesn't reach the slightest end, and in fact the creators have just captivated the audience. Just as easily. No summation and logical end. Batman. Arkham Asylum. Sometimes crossing some red lines in the context of personality and transformation of a character leads to undesirable results. One of these undue red lines and risks happened at the end of the Batman, Arkham Asylum game. Where, after many interactions, the Joker, in a strange move, injects himself with Titan's formula and becomes a great green monster. Yes, the Joker, who everyone remembers by madness, his different decisions and behavior. In the stereotypical way, Resident Evil's boss fight become a great monster. This decision was contrary to the Joker's entire identity and characterization and did not match the character's Hoin. Ghost and Goblins. The classic, old-fashioned title, released in the 1980s, has one of the craziest conclusions in video game history. The goal of the gamers is to find and save Princess Prin Prin, but after passing through various dangers and monsters and defeating the last boss that is the devil and finding the prince, you will find that all the work you have done to this point is delusional and you must once again complete all stages of the game from beginning to end, this time on a higher hardness level to save the prince. I don't think there's an end so stupid and irrational. Mass Effect 3. Just this much, I have to say that unlike classic role-playing games, audience decisions have almost no effect on the final events of the game, and even the consequences of final decisions are not shown properly. This led to so many protests that BioWare tried to remedy it in various annexation packages. But either way, one of the best trilogies in game history ended in a rather hopeless and far-fetched way. The Last of Us, Part 2. For myself, the most disappointing, weakest and worst ending in the last few years belonged to Naughty Dog's masterpiece, The Last of Us, Part 2. In the field of gameplay, characterization, struggles, artistic graphics, technical graphics, sound and space, the second version of The Last of Us was a masterpiece in the history of video games. But the endgame was so weak and unreasonable that it leaves no even debate. The first big problem ending the game was when Abby, after receiving Eli, Owen and Mel murder, took herself to Ellie's hiding place and, after a few stages of the altercation, gave up killing Ellie. Can you believe it? Abby, whose old friend Owen and many of her friends were killed by Ellie and her entourage. She forgave Ellie and refused to kill her, leaving with the sentence, "Don't ever let me see you again." The same Abby who refused to do anything when in danger and even killed her former warriors when she fled the island when she arrived in Ellie, inspired by Bollywood cinema, came to her mercy and not only did not kill her, but also spared the life of Dina, who was pregnant. I know what answer you've prepared. Your answer is that Abby refused to kill them because of Lev. The point is that the apocalyptic world of The Last of Us is a dark, dark world, and forgiveness has no place in it. In the first version, we witness the fact that Joel killed the head of the Firefly group without hesitation, because they were likely to come after Ellie again and harass her. The Last of Us world has a simple rule. Kill or be killed. Abby killed a lot of people during the game and accompanied them in many parts of Lev, so why was it only at the end of the story that forgiveness ignited in Abby and forgiving her greatest enemy who had taken many of her loved ones from her? Was Lev's opposition the only thing Abby needed? Wouldn't Abby have the possibility that Ellie would follow her again to get revenge, something that exactly gave her? Don't forget the hot loss of Val and Owen was still fresh. The problem and the next disadvantage of the endgame relates to where Ellie abandoned Dina and her daughter, left her home and went all past to find Abby and avenge Joel. But in disbelief as he was strangling her, Neil Druckmann was inspired by Bollywood cinema again and recalled Ellie flashback of Joel. There's nothing wrong so far. The problem is that instead of recalling Joel's cruel death, making Ellie determined to kill Abby, she abandons Abby. That is, remembering the dearest person in his life who was murdered in a heinous way, instead of igniting the fire of vengeance, brought Eli's heart to mercy. It makes perfect sense. Ellie slaughtered hundreds to get to Abby. But when he reached Abby, he forgave her. Perhaps the author's message was that revenge is bad. It's ridiculous and funny. The final events of the game were not logical at all and were completely at odds with the identity and space of the black world of The Last of Us Part 2. Whether you're a fan of the game or not, it must be acknowledged that the end of the title was a disastrous feat. Disaster.